Hey there everybody, Eric from Outer Limitless coming at you today with another video. Now in a prior video, we took a look at some knives from the company Shieldon Knives. Now Shieldon is a company whose knives are fairly new to the market. They have 8 models right now and moving into more than that, but 8 original models and then a couple of new ones coming out. And in the past, we did take a look at these with mixed results. Now here you can see their Empoleon model having kind of a hard time opening up. Well, that's because in that video, unfortunately, I damaged this knife quite a bit while I was trying to disassemble it. Not only did I damage the knife, I damaged my thumb by stabbing myself straight into the bone with a star bit. Absolutely awesome. Love it when that happens. But hey, that's what happens sometimes. However, the important lesson is that the people at Shieldon are very interested in perfecting their knives. Not just the overall shape and size and fit and finish, but the fine details, the things that some people are really going to care about, like for example, the ability to disassemble the knives. Now, if you're the avid collector or somebody a little more advanced, chances are, well, you're probably maintaining your knives quite a bit. You're constantly taking them apart, you're constantly cleaning them, you're keeping them nice, high-teched, perfect, oiled, cleaned, put away, in nice condition. Well, the only way to really do that is by taking them apart. So having a knife that you literally can't take apart and could potentially damage it or hurt yourself, that's definitely a problem. And Shieldon has listened. So what we're going to do today is take a look at a couple of the original 8 that we looked at in the past, but well, they now have some updates. So looking at the updated knives, what are we going to find? Well, based upon some critical feedback, I think you're going to like the changes that they made. And then from there, well, past the original 8, here is another model, making it 9 in the Shieldon lineup. So we're going to get a look at this. And in the future, full field review on a couple of these blades, which is pretty cool. And so, well, when we come back, we're going to take a look at these in detail, comparing the new ones versus the old, so you can see some of the updates and really the direction Shieldon's going in. And again, I think you guys are gonna like it. So with that said, I have a whole bunch to do and a whole bunch to share with you. And if you're interested in seeing a little bit more about what I'm about to get into, do me a favor, stay tuned. Now, before we get too far, I would like to say thank you very much to the people at Shieldon Knives who did provide these for review. And so here with some of the original models, we are going to look again at the Empoleon, which, keep in mind, I did damage. And we're gonna look at the Boa. A couple of other knives that we did take a look at, just so that you can see. This here, this is the Barracuda, which I do greatly enjoy. It's a nice design, very nice, good overall performance, but again, the inability to take this apart. And here, this is the Tortank. Again, greatly enjoying this. Fantastic blade, absolutely beautiful. Damascus pattern, really cool. But the same sort of fate, the inability to take this apart. But moving forward here, this is the new Empoleon. So a little bit of a change in some of the overall capability to take this apart, and I'm hoping a little bit of a change in some of the design. Now, we're going to talk about that in detail in just a second, but first, that there, the Empoleon, and finally you can see just back to some nice snappy action. The thing about Shieldon is they are definitely doing a nice job with their fit and finish. You can see perfectly centered blade and nice and snappy for a even very small, dainty blade. I mean, not, it's got some decent blade length, but it's not overly deep, so it doesn't have a ton of mass to it, and for it to snap open like that, very nice. So again, you can see here in a new finish. So the original here was in the black finish, and then the new one here in the gray. So keep that in mind. Black is old, gray is new. So that's the Empoleon. And then here, the Boa. So this is the updated Boa. Here you can see this here in the black finish. So it's the exact opposite as the Empoleon. The original here in gray. Now, keeping in mind this original gray Boa, I did not have the ability to take apart at all. It absolutely was not gonna go. So they've made some changes, some updates, and then flipping this over, I believe, and I might be wrong, but we're gonna look closely. I think I see something that's a nice design change, and that's gonna be pretty important to this at the end of the day for those of you who are interested in taking these apart. So again, this here being the Boa. And so as we get into the details here, let's take a look at the original Empoleon, which again, I caused a lot of damage to this knife as I was trying to take this apart. Everything being glued and Loctited together. I'm pretty sure they used a glue. Now, the funny thing about this beyond the glue, and again, just looking at it from the serviceability, keep in mind, I am the US service representative for Best Tech Knives, so I do a ton of work taking knives apart, and I could not get this knife apart. And the reason being, well, two things. One, that glue definitely didn't work out well at all. So gluing literally like everything together, I couldn't even get the the pivot assembly and the pivot screw apart. You'll see it as a two-sided screw, so I could not get that apart. And then even to the point where, I mean, I did get the clip off and started pulling some of this apart, but the problem is on the clip, these are not T8 or T6s. So here in my hands, this here is a T8 driver. You can see here, getting it on the pivot screw assembly, no problem. That's the T8 fitting perfectly. But now trying to get it on the back of the clip, well, that won't fit at all. So the T8 is going to be too big, and here a T6. So getting the T6, you can see here on the frame screws, working perfectly, so that's the right size. But then getting it on the clip, well, that's way too loose. So these are a T7. So in order to disassemble this knife, fully glued together, which wasn't gonna work, you need T8s, T6s, and T7s. So let's see what Shieldon's doing with the Empoleon at this point. Now taking a look here, this is in the gray. When you look at the model number, underneath all of this, it says 9049. I think that's a G1G for gray. And the original 9049 G1B for black. So they are kind of differentiating their model numbers a little bit by the color. So that's one thing that you can note. So first things first, looking at the back, let's test out these different drivers. So here we're going to get on this with the T8. That fits perfect, no problem. Getting on the frame with the T6. Yep, perfect, no problem. What about these screws on the clip? These are now a T6. So Shieldon is listening. They are really trying to make a concerted effort to listen to the consumer, listen to the experts, and make the changes. So now I don't need to find the random T7 that probably like nobody has. It's not a common size, but most people interested in maintaining their knives have T8s and T6s at the ready. So now doing away with the T7s, that's fantastic. So what I was trying to do before was a full disassembly to see what is it underneath all of this. Well, let's get into this coming apart nicely. I mean, bottom line is, fact of the matter, anybody who wants to Loctite their own knives can certainly do so. I just don't like it being forced upon me. I mean, I'd rather have the ability to easily get these knives apart and then just be careful. And if you want, strategically add a little bit of blue Loctite maybe from time to time to kind of tighten things up. But now I can at least get the clip off. Yep, no problem. Getting now on the frame screws. Awesome, no problem. That's a big deal. I was struggling with that for sure before. The other nice thing is usually you don't necessarily have to take both sides apart for basic maintenance. So here you can see working out pretty well. I really only have to disassemble the one side. And now the T8 on that pivot screw. Is this working? Let's see. So you might need two T8s at this point. I'm going to grab a second T8 bit so I can get on the opposite side of this. I'm not a huge fan of the double-sided star. I think that just adds complication. I personally would rather see a D-style pivot screw, something that indexes and allows you to take it apart without needing two tools at once, but we're stepping in the right direction, so let's keep moving forward. And this is always where it's a little tricky. As somebody, again, who performs service, I really don't like doing this because you're just asking to damage a knife. But here, it is turning slowly, but it's turning and it's coming apart. So you may want to disassemble your pivot assembly first before you disassemble the frame. So I kind of made that mistake here, but I won't make that mistake again. And you'll see, as long as you're careful, that will work. So there we go. Getting into it here, taking a look. Well, you get a number of different parts. I was very curious as to what we would see the last time. And now as we get into this, pulling this all apart, well, very cool. So here you can see you do end up with a ceramic bearing in a plastic race. So these seem very smooth. Actually, they are nicely lubricated, so a little over lubricated, but that's good for storage and shipping. I'd rather that and kind of clean it up myself and fine tune it later on than not enough. This is D2. So taking a look here, this is a D2 blade. It comes a little bit oiled, which is, again, very good. I think that's a very important factor. So packaging this up with some oil on it. You can see in the frame here, skeletonized, so that's sweet. I mean, lightening it up just a bit and matching in the color of the blade with the actual liner itself, which is cool. This has a nice standoff spacer, very nicely done. So all in all, this worked out pretty well. Again, just my recommendation at this point in the future, you know, they could definitely come up with their own sort of proprietary design on the pivot screw, which I think would be nice. You know, add their shield logo for the Shieldon logo, and then make really more of a D style, which would hold it in place and allow it basically to be open from one side alone. But generally speaking, a vast improvement. I do have to say I am very happy to see Shieldon making this kind of an adjustment in their process. It's working out for the better for everybody, definitely moving in the right direction. So this Empoleon, nicely done. Now, so far, reassembly, very straightforward, but I'm at the point now where you'll see the blade centering is completely off, which is totally normal at this point. But what I need to do is dial in my pivot assembly. So you'll see the pivot screw I have not tightened down all the way. But I make this point because, well, unfortunately, I still technically need two T8s at the same time to do this. So, for example, if I just tried to tighten down, no matter how much pressure I put on this side, I cannot get this to fully tighten down as much as it needs. At this point, this side is spinning. So I can't get the pressure that I need on that to get this to move. So again, going back to the need for two tools here at the same time. So that means the user will need two T8s and a T6. And I'm not a huge fan of that. And again, now I'm literally applying pressure with one hand, pushing towards another. This is not balanced. This does not go very well generally, and it ends up causing damage to the knife, to the tool, or even to your hands. So, I mean, I'm doing the best I can here to be careful, but you'll see it really does require me to use two tools at the same time, which is like a balancing act. And I wouldn't even think they'd want to do this at the factory. And the fact that they're actually going through this on assembly of every knife, I don't know how they do it. I wouldn't want to do it. It just seems like an unnecessary sort of liability. But at this point, you can see I do have the blade perfectly centered, so no problem. And then the action, buttery smooth. So the idea that you can take the knife apart at this point, get it back together, and you can see just buttery smooth deployment, buttery smooth action. That's nice. So my critique at this point, I am very happy to see the adjustment going from the T7s to the T6s on the clip. I am very happy to see that they have not Loctited this or glued it together, but my recommendation, at least here on the Empoleon, at this point, go with a single-sided pivot screw. Make it a little bit easier, again, for disassembly and for overall maintenance. Now that's the Empoleon. What about the Boa? So again, going back to the original Boa, this was the one here in gray. One thing I'm noticing, you can see the logo. It says Boa and then Django, who is the designer. You can see right there. They've made a minor adjustment, and they've actually moved that up to the top of the blade now. So just a little bit of an aesthetic thing. But what about the overall construction? Well, on the original Boa, same thing. You can see the two-sided T8 pivot screw, and then the T6s on the frame screws, and then T7s on the clip. Now with the new Boa, well, same thing. Unfortunately, we do have that two-sided pivot assembly with the T8s. We do have what looks to be, I would say, T6s still on the frame. So let's check that real quick. Getting on it here. Yes, so T6s on the frame. But what about the clip? Are these T7s? Well, at this point, T6s, perfect. So again, making the adjustment with the Boa so that you end up with just the two different sizes. But unfortunately, I believe at this point, I still technically need to own 3 tools. I'm gonna first try to get this pivot assembly apart without 2 tools. This one actually does look like it's gonna go. So maybe if you leave the actual frame together first and remove the frame screws last, that might actually make a difference. So I got that pivot screw out pretty easy. Now getting into disassembly of the clip, very simple. You can see on here a little bit of blue Loctite, but it didn't seem to bother this at all. So it did what it needed to, and it came apart pretty easy. So no concerns just yet. And again, there you go. So the clip coming off easy. No worries. Let's get into the frame screws. So again, getting on it with the T6. Yep, no problem. These loosen up with ease. So no worries or fears that these are going to strip, which is awesome because there is no worse feeling than stripping out these little stainless screws in your pocket knife. That is a wicked frustration, and it's just a horrible feeling. But here, getting that apart, no worries. And actually that will come right out. There we go. And now taking a look at the Boa Construction. Very similar in a way to what we saw on the Empoleon, only a larger blade. You can see here, this is definitely skeletonized. So getting on the frame, skeletonized. Black coating to match, you can see here, matching nicely with the blade. So looking really good. Ceramic bearings, you can see here again. They are small. I'm not 100% sure exactly what size they are, but you can see they are small, but they do seem to work very, very well. This particular knife having nice standoffs. Now this does not have a back spacer, but it has these nice standoffs. These look really good, and I do like the open design. You can see a cutout, and generous cutout for a lanyard. You can see here even some skeletonizing on the side with the liner lock. So definitely nice. You can see some oil in strategic locations. Again, that's a good thing when these are in the packaging, when they're in a warehouse, when they're being shipped, when they're being stored, all the different places that these will be before they land in your pocket. Well, you definitely want them to be protected. So Shieldon seemingly doing a very nice job, and the fact that I can get this Boa apart with ease, that's fantastic. And so far, assembly going very straightforward at this point, trying to get the pivot assembly back together. And I think that's going to be the key with these double-sided stars on the pivot assembly. So let's see here how well this goes. So Just kind of getting this started here. I'm not going to go too crazy because I do need to kind of keep an eye on the blade. So actually, that pulled right into place. I'm just going to go tiny little sort of snug there. Centering on this seems to be just about perfect. Assembly going very well. And the action, no worries at all. Usually 1 or 2 flicks and you're right back. You can hear maybe a little bit of noise. I should probably get a little bit more oil in there, but definitely much better. And let's see here. The original and now the new. Let me clean this up just a little bit, see if I can quiet that down. Now, one thing I did for ease of maintenance was I actually just flipped the pivot screw around so that now I actually assemble on this side, which is actually going to be helpful as I'm watching my blade centering. As a righty, this is going to be a little bit easier for me to work on this. There's just about perfect. Everything's nice and tight, and still a little bit of the sound of that detent ball sort of dragging along that liner, which, well, we'll see how that is over time. So overall, I mean, the action, perfect. The disassembly, reassembly, no problem, going very well. So at this point, I can clean this up. I can get this put into my rotation. This boa, definitely cool. And so last but not least today, well, we are going to look at this new design. This here is the Bulbasaur. So this being in Sandvik 14C28N, very cool. So slightly different from what we've seen in the past from Shieldon, so that's nice. This again being designed by Django, and you'll see that the handle material is G10. Now my question is, when we look at this model is the 9061G-M. So M, what is that going to mean in terms of the material? Well, let's get a look at this Bulbasaur. So getting it out of the box. Now, in the past, as we looked at these Shieldon products, this is packaged the exact same way. They do a nice job. The packaging's very nicely done. You can see here, this does come in a nice case, so cool little case. And their instruction manual. But as we get into this, ooh, that's pretty. So here, the Bulbasaur, very cool. I mean, look at this multicolored G10. So black and green. Nice green anodized pivot collar. Very cool. It's actually multicolor. When you look at it, it's kind of a bluish green color. Really, really neat. And you can see the mirror polish already sort of shining off the blade. The pocket clip here, everything. So very cool. Now, let's take a look at this design. Nice deployment, no problem. Again, this is the Bulbasaur. And look at that mirror polish shining right back at the camera. I'm just going to clean this up real quick so we can get a closer look. So again here, the Bulbasaur. Now I did clean this up just a little bit. I didn't go crazy, but just to point out a few things. First off, nice sort of leaf design to this. Very cool drop point, nice large blade, decent belly. Overall, actually a pretty large knife in the hands, sort of in that large mid-size pocket knife, which I do like. And comparing it here against, say, for example, the Boa, you can see pretty much about the same in overall length, but with that deep blade, just a little bit more mass, nicely shaped. I do like it. Fits in your hand nicely. Now, taking a look here, very cool machining. They're doing a nice job with the machining on their handles. This particular collar design here, very similar to what we saw on the Tortank, which I do like. So comparing it there, you can see very similar around that pivot assembly. So that's very cool. Some mild jimping and nicely done. This is a polished frame, so you can see the frame and also the clip matching in with the blade, so definitely cool. And the one thing that I think I'm just going to nitpick, and I'm just doing this for Shieldon so that, again, as they want to continue to improve, these are the little things I think people are going to pick up on. Yes, this is a mirror finish, and it's on a fairly budget level blade, but at the same time you can see right here as I rotate the knife some flat spots where there's some like blemishes. And that's probably a factor maybe of assembly, or maybe it's just an artifact, but you can see some of these blemishes. It's just unfortunate because this is otherwise a very even finish. And I think that's just a minor detail, but something they should pay attention to. But overall here, again, the Bulbasaur, this is a nice knife added to the Shieldon lineup. And in a similar fashion, we're just going to check this real quick to see what they're doing with the hardware, making sure that now they're standardizing on the T8s and T6s. So getting on the pivot screw here, T8, no problem. On the frame screws, well, these are already a little bit loose, but that's a T6 for sure. This one here, again, no problem. That's a T6 for sure. On the back, now this is definitely not a T6. Is it a T8? No. So for some reason, on the new model, they seem to have gone back to the T7s. And I bet you that's a mistake. I bet you they didn't want to do that, and they got caught in the middle of their process. So I will talk to Shieldon about that. This is definitely a nice tight fitting T6 on the frame screw. That comes out no problem. Tightens no problem. Here on the clip, that's just way too much movement for a T6. This absolutely has to be a T7. So again, I will verify that with the people at Shieldon and make sure that they make that adjustment moving forward, going back to the T6. Or up to T8 for that matter. But I think T7's just an odd size, and it leaves people with just sort of an odd place with their knife maintenance. And so, all right, guys, there you have it. A look at these updated knives from Shieldon. Again, looking at that Boa, very nice adjustment, you know, making the changes in the hardware, some changes in the overall construction and their ability to get these assembled without gluing them completely together. So some nice steps forward. With the Bulbasaur, cool to see that they're playing with a different steel. Awesome to see a new blade finish. But again, just to the people at Shieldon, a little bit of refinement, and in my opinion, just paying attention to that final blade polish, making sure it's perfect, making sure that there aren't those sort of scuffs and blemishes on there. I think that'll go a long way for you. And then just paying attention, making sure that we don't take a step back, because I'd hate to see, like in the Boa and the Empoleon, a good step forward on the hardware, especially making the adjustment on the clip screws. So both the case on the Boa and on the Empoleon, but now on the Bulbasaur, just kind of missing that mark. So again, very nicely done, but just some minor tweaks in my opinion. In the future, a couple of full-length reviews. We're going to get into these in a little more detail. We're definitely going to get into this Tortank. I've been kind of waiting for this moment to make it through some of this iteration and the progress that we've seen. So thank you to Shieldon for sending all of these along, giving me the opportunity to provide feedback early in your process. I think that's a big deal. And so we are going to start looking at these knives individually in some detail, getting them into some good practical field use, getting some impressions, and look at the overall edge quality, not just the rest of the manufacturing process. So much more from Shieldon to come. So all right, guys, thanks for stopping by. I hope you like what you saw. I hope you found it a little bit informative. If you like what you saw, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Take care now. I'll see you soon.